You send an email to everybody and ask 20 people, by the end of the week, can you send me your areas of expertise, because I need to compile it for something. You could do that. What happens with something like that? Well, a third of the people will send it, a third of the people will not send it, a third will ask, why do you need it? Okay?
All right, so we put those blocks of flats over here and we'll put a forest over here. And so, yeah, but that's a lake. Oh, that's fine, we put the lake over here then. Hello, Jarek.
Hello, Kamil.
We're in Warsaw, still in Warsaw, still in the weather's changing. Like, I feel like we went through at least 5 days or maybe even 5 different, what you call it? What's the seasons? Yeah, that's the word. Thank you. For different seasons in the last hours. Let's. I mean, we've talked a bit in the previous time about my challenge and some decisions that we need to do based on some of the changes that happen in our lives as well. But I mean, you're gonna have to or already deal much more in your work right now with management, which comes to when management is resource management, and it's actually organizing stuff and processes and to work more efficiently and give us a better output. I told you that I'm changing a bit more into a world of technology, world of systems, and actually looking at supply chain and business in general more from this kind of a angle of again processes, systems, and there's one specific topic that I know we've touched a few times in our private conversations, which I'd love to explore, and it's around the sort of a constant, or at least in my opinion, a constant move of everything we see around the world, whether that's work or something else, towards centralization. So each functions, every issue that you want to solve right now, you go to a shared service. You call something which is connected together. There's lots of center of excellence which are created right now, which then just sell the, very specific, but yet centralized functions to a remote locations or things like that. Or even, I guess, in the world, outside, you just see more and more big companies buying smaller companies or middle companies. Or if someone is successful, they get bought out. And I guess under the sort of a flag of effectiveness and actually synergy and bringing stuff together and bringing similarities into the same places and doing it, actually creating those big centralized kind of a functions. Do you feel world's going like that? Do you feel?
So for me, I probably won't be as general as to say the world. So I can talk a bit about the kind of what I see in my place of work, about where I live. So 2 examples. One from work, kind of maybe centralizing different functions of a company, so for example, since we talked a lot about IT, in the old times, when I say old times, this might be 5 years ago.
Fair enough.
Where this was much more specialized to like small units, let's say the place where I work. Now pretty much everything is happening at a very high level, where yes, there are certain efficiencies created that they'll be expert in something very specific, very, very small. Let's say somebody might be an expert in Microsoft products on Mac computers. That's where they are specializing in, and it doesn't matter where the question is coming from, they might be able to answer such a question. Where in the past, it might be, that person might have had knowledge about different pieces of software on different systems and so on, but there was not maybe a specialized, which in general it sounds great.
Yeah.
Now, the problem starts, as I see, and again, it's not like one thing is good, the other thing is bad. But let's say if such a person leaves place of work, and there's nobody else who is really an expert in that area, we might have a kind of a huge break, or a huge break in somebody actually being able to answer a question you might have.
Yeah.
So even if something is centralized, having overlap in kind of in different areas of expertise, I think would be important.
But then, when you say, I don't know if I understood completely. So when you say in this more centralized sort of a work, if someone, if you lose, let's have this example that somebody knows. Do you think in the centralized people know more, so the variety of thing, or because it might be we might understand it's quite different, because for me, centralized comes, and I might be wrong, but I'm thinking for me centralized, and in the business, in the place where I work, it goes more into people are far more specialized in their task, but you just group them together. So actually in this thing, when you lose someone with a very specific tool set that either someone can fill in from who is in that group, because there's more of them naturally because of they playing a role for a number of businesses. So it's not just one person in IT, let's call it, in the old way. But actually, it's much easier to replace that person, because then it's a very specific skill set. In the other thing, when you have someone who's an IT specialist in a factory, in Warsaw, somewhere over here, and he knows, to your point as well, knows a bit on this, knows a bit on this. And by the way, we installed this piece of software, and we actually have this type of a machine over here that we're using. That person just filled that gap over the way. Then when you lose a capability like that, it creates like a shape that then is also very difficult to fill, because you won't find another person like that, because it's it's that sort of and I'm using the word shape because it's just if you know what I mean around there. So I'm thinking when I think centralized, I'm thinking an army or a small armies of very specialized kind of a people, rather than I guess everyone's coming to a central or one person that is doing it. I don't know if that's the same.
It's similar, I would say, but again, it's we are coming from different kind of perspectives a bit. But what I was trying to say is, so for me, let's say if we have, say, 2 people for every 20 employees versus 10 people for 200 employees. So notice I didn't just multiply these 2 people like by 10. It's just because these are the efficiencies that are being created. But then what happens is, and I'm going back to the conversation we had in the previous podcast about personal connections as well. So if I have to deal with somebody different for every problem, it's very hard to build this personal relationship. So to tell you the truth, I would rather deal with the same person who kind of knows even how I'm asking questions, or what maybe my usual problems are, and maybe they don't know the answer, but they can ask somebody. And this is, again, I'm not saying one system is better than the other necessarily, because it all depends how they are organized. But the thing is, with this push towards centralization, sometimes without much of an input from people who actually interact. We're concentrating on IT, but this is, these are other things as well, finances, or in different places of work, it might be, different functions that support kind of staff serve. But what's happening is, at the centralized system, it might look like it's efficient from above, but actually this system serving others might not be seen as efficient from, I don't say below, but actually people who have to interact with such a system.
Or in center of it, or in...
It's a tricky thing. It also requires, the centralized system, it requires very good management and kind of specialization that, if you can specialize in such a way that it takes you half the time to solve different problems, yes, because then you can spend time on kind of sharing of a specialization and so on. But if you save 10% of the time and 10% of the money, I would rather have something that's not as specialized, but being more personalized.
Okay. It's I guess the example that we could use that I always see as the biggest danger, and if we look, let's get out of IT, let's talk something that I know probably far better. If you think manufacturing, manufacturing is quite often, quite often is probably usually the most maybe not difficult but streamlined area of the business that looks at efficiency. I mean, it needs it. It needs to be really, it needs to stick to get out and needs to be on time, and with the number of people, it really needs to be there. Now, if you think about a organization, so let's think about a company that sells shoes or cups, and then if you structure that company that it has, because you've talked about the management and whatever, that there's a one interpreter, an owner, let's call it, that's how it starts, and that's how usually happens. There's an owner, the owner has sales, which is the most important thing, then we have suppliers on the other hand, and then it goes through, we need to procure the supplies, it goes, then manufacturing runs it, and then we sell it, advertise through marketing, etc., etc. And it also almost serves one goal, which, like, the management is almost decentralized, because there's a management for all of those functions right now at the same time, and they all sort of so a person on production goes like, they have sales in their mind, because they're there to sell cups or shoes or whatever we did around it. When you start to grow, and when normally a bigger company comes in and starts to buy it, you start to have a number of those factories and a number of those bits. And what's quite often happens is then you start to cut the actual structure in a different way. You go like, because we have so much manufacturing around the world, and actually it's quite expensive to manufacture, and the world changes, and we want to make sure, we're actually starting to manage manufacturing on its own, going through all of those areas. And then what manufacturing looks like, it wants to be efficient, so they'll come up with an efficiency KPI or something. And the big risk of that, what is happening, is manufacturing now starts to look at how to be most efficient. They don't look at how to sell. They just look like, and it starts to be, to your point around, it might look efficient from the outside, and from like the helicopter view, it goes like, yeah, of course it makes sense. Let's use all the same tools and machinery in all of our factories. Let's be able to move the products if we need to, and tariffs show up from day to day, but then from the inside, that's when you start to go, you have and I can't remember who told me that, but I think it might have been one of my old bosses. He said, like, it creates clerks rather than entrepreneurs or parts of the family. And that's where I always see, like, it looks very efficient there, but the efficiency starts to be pointed towards something which is in the actual goal that you're trying to achieve as a whole company. And obviously when you go to scales like, the big Coca-Cola's, Unilever's on this world and whatever, it would be really difficult to run every single factory that they have, if they have hundreds, as a separate thing, and it's a natural thing through it. But at the same time, I think there's a balance that always needs to happen. I looked at when I was preparing to the subject as well. There was a good example historically around, like, where centralization really helped, and Rome was the one used as one of the first, which sort of look how it helped to actually expand and to do. To become something of one of the biggest empires that we had in. But then at the same time, what it says is where it starts to decentralize on the other side of the scale is right now the digital age. So the startups kind of a mentality that you create everything there. Yeah. If you like the topics discussed on this podcast and you would like to hear some more, please do not forget to subscribe and push the like and the bell button.
Yes, we'll have more exciting guests, and the topics that we'll discuss will cover what we usually cover, business and academia and the intersection of them.
So please do subscribe and push the like.
So again, we're going back to it depends, but it's what you were saying about manufacturing. I can see that perfectly, but you know, for me, it's like different. For you, like you have the sales, the suppliers, and so on. They play different roles. For me, in like where I work, different units, let's say even at the same university, at the same school, might do stuff in different ways. Just to give you an example, where I work, we have researchers having so-called wet labs. What do I mean by that? They have animals, they might have, you know, like cell cultures and so on, and they do experiments, they have to collect data and so on. Well, whereas, you know, in my department, we usually work with numbers. So the equipment being serviced for them versus for us is very different. Because for them, it's like they need something, maybe very specialized software.
And for investments and specific conditions, and it all costs, and it all,
But it's also if you have somebody supporting it, it's very hard to transfer such skills from, you know, this wet lab thing to numbers, because these are just different skills.
Okay.
So if this is becoming centralized, that might create certain friction.
Right.
And again, I'm not saying one system is perfect or better than the other, but we have to pay attention what we service. Like, you know, as I was giving this example earlier, it might look efficient. If you look from, you said helicopter view or you know, this 10,000 feet view, but when you are actually on the ground, it looks efficient, but nobody's happy about this efficiency.
It's it reminds me of when you said like, and you moved about the helicopter view, there's this famous Polish movie when the guy is planning an urban kind of area, and he knows nothing about it, but he thinks that's what it is, and he doesn't go into the detail, and just sort of like, all right, so we put those blocks of flats over here, and we'll put a forest over here. I'm like, yeah, but that's a lake. Oh, that's fine. We put the lake over here then. It's a bit like this sometimes. In a way. I mean, I guess what comes with the models of sort of a specialized, centralized functions is quite often like using outsourcing of third parties. Is that something? I mean, in the science world of, and I know a science world is a variety of stuff, and it probably depends again where it is. But is that a common thing that happens? Because it sort of sounds like the science or the academic world should be the kind of, are you doing the research on something? So I'm going to, and you've talked about it before. I'm going to take some of your thing and use it or do it. Is that?
So again, depends.
Right.
Like let's say, and I can give you an example from the studies I kind of participated in, or I kind of help to run, that if you have a big operation, we might, let's say, hire a company that does surveys for like tens of thousands of people. Because building that in-house would require enormous resources for like one study. It's just not worth it. However, then you have to take into account all the costs that come with that, and if this is really specialized, you know, we want to do, you know, this 1 hour survey on 50,000 people. Okay, it's clear goals. It's, you know, it's very clear what needs to be done and what we get out of it. Now, that's theory, yes, because this is maybe for another podcast, but that's this balance between the cost efficiency and kind of what you want versus what you get.
Of course, makes sense. Do you think it, you know, centralizing, putting things actually kills creativity? Because I've heard that from a few people saying you start to just follow a very specific process and it just doesn't spark as many ideas or get people to think about it
So, you know, in manufacturing, since you mentioned that, I think it's good to have centralization and having these very efficient processes, because you don't want, if you need to fill up like a cup with 90% of a liquid, you don't need creativity.
Sure.
You become
you need execution.
efficient.
Efficient execution.
Yes.
Yeah.
somebody might come up with, well, if I can fill it up in like half the time, well, great. You save money, you save resources, yes. But otherwise, if it's really specified what you need to do, yes. But in our fast-changing world, very frequently, things just progress so fast that, you know, if you don't change, you disappear.
You disappear.
And there was a beautiful movie about BlackBerry. Remember?
I still haven't seen it.
Yes.
Yeah, I know you've talked about it. Still haven't seen it. I need to watch it. Yeah.
Which, you know, it's one of the owners said, people will never want a personal device where you cannot hear the click when they type. Well, these days we don't hear those clicks, and nobody has actually a keyboard on their devices. It's everything. It's touch. Yes. So again, we need to change, to adjust. Yes. And sometimes what you said about creativity, yes, if everything is centralized, specialized, and you know, you can do it for a few years, maybe a few months. Who knows? You can't do it forever.
I agree, and it's good. You've mentioned the volatility of the world right now, because I think it has two elements of it. One is around, you know, sort of a keeping up with the world, I guess, you know, changing in a way to do. And it's obviously much harder to change something which is bigger and more established, and you know, processes are just embedded in that way. I'm seeing it live right now. It's not there, but I think sometimes the actual, you know, the systems which are well established and actually centralized in its functions to a degree, they can be centralized to a degree that are actually become like fragile in a way of the world that is changing right now. And I think I mentioned tariffs before as well, but for supply chain, tariffs is one of the biggest inputs to where do you produce stuff. Yeah. And when you look at today's supply chains, and when you look at how specialized they are, and how, you know, sort of decentralized, depends how you look from what angle, decentralized in a way of the functions around the world and who does what and how specialized they are in their functions there. Just a situation like that might change, you know, the way of how you want to operate, because you want now source certain things from completely different place because the costs go in like that. But the cost or the effort to actually change it becomes just absolutely, you know, gargantuan and big. And then, and I'm actually thinking a lot recently around how a strategy for supply chain should evolve around, you know, what you actually bring as a value. And I think more and more, or it's less and less, it's the cost element, and more of the agility and the way of how can you react and how to do it, which sometimes comes with a bit of a cost on the normal operation. But when a black swan event comes in, look, I'm learning, listening, when the black swan event comes in, then you can react, and you actually don't, you know, not even disappear, like the Suez Canal. We've talked about it as well beforehand, but yeah.
Well, there's this old saying, you know, what you were saying about the costs and, you know, this gargantuan effort, but sometimes we have to adjust, and as they say, the necessity is the mother of invention.
Sure.
Yes? And this is something, if we rely too much on one way of doing things and we don't invest in anything else, this one thing stops working, and then we're really doomed. So these days, actually, this kind of, even with the supply chains, diversification, where do we get it from? You know, that's becoming even, I think the pandemic brought it, especially you know, in the past few years, where certain supply lines were really cut off. And then if we just relied on one of them, we're doomed.
I agree. Well, we haven't come to a conclusion. I mean, it probably poses more questions, and we could take every single element of it. But there's the one thing which interests me from a skill set perspective in that concept as well, around, I guess, generalist and specialization in a field. And when I looked through my career, the more I guess, west you go, the more specialized the fields in study, for example, go, and whatever. And they seem to be always like a much more efficient model. So you can focus on a field of study which is much less broad, I guess, than some of the universities in Polis, I guess. So if you look at a PhD, and that's just my impression of the thing. So the field of study in Poland for me is quite vast sometimes, when in US or UK it's going to be a very specific thing. So I don't know if
it might depend on the discipline.
Right, sure. And I'm thinking, is that changing right now, Jarek, or is this still is it the same?
So, if you are doing a doctorate, especially in sciences, especially in sciences, you have to be specialized, because it's very hard in a few short years to be too broad.
Right.
However, there is more and more of interdisciplinary research where, yes, you are specialized in what you do, but you collaborate with people in other fields where everybody brings this specialized kind of approach to what they do. However, who I find the most amazing, and actually I'm working with such a student now. He's not my student, he's a student of another professor. But what amazes me about this guy is, depending who he talks to, he can explain things in different ways. So the same thing in different ways, depending on the skill set that the other person possesses.
Right.
And I think this is becoming very important. So it's not only your specialized area of study, by being able to communicate what you do with different stakeholders.
And understanding, I guess, the things. Yes. We've talked in manufacturing about T-shaped people. I don't know if we can say that. I mean, and it meant like you don't just stand in your, you're not an eye, you're not just standing in your role, but you're specialized in that specific field, but you understand and you can actually communicate with the others, so you know the relations and you know how it is, and that's the sort of a model which. So
remind me, if we talked about that before, just stop me when I'm explaining that, but it's, so if all this kind of changes going on, like, these days, kind of AI or large language models, that we kind of use, ChatGPT or the Copilot in Microsoft. It's there was for a while this worry that such tools might replace humans as employees. And I read not so long ago this wonderful sentence that, when personal computers were coming around, like 50 years ago, something like that, computers will replace people. And actually that didn't happen. What happened was people who were able to use computers, they replaced people who were not able to use them.
Absolutely.
The same now. It's like I just to give you an example, I had this task, that I was given, that there was this external company to our place who said, well, could you give us a list of the expertise of the faculty members in my department? And I was like, okay, how do I do it? So one way, I call it the old way, is you send an email to everybody and ask 20 people, by the end of the week, can you send me your areas of expertise, because I need to compile it for something. You could do that. What happens with something like that? Well, a third of the people will send it, a third of the people will not send it, a third will ask, why do you need it? Okay? So instead what we did was I asked actually my assistant, I had access to all the CVs of all the faculty members. I asked this person, can you throw this CV
into a model
in the Copilot and extract the areas of expertise, and then send those things to those faculty members and ask them, do you agree that these are your areas of expertise?
That's a completely differently.
We couldn't do it even like 2-3 years ago. Now it's, I didn't even have to do it. It's somebody who, it's not an expert in AI or anything, but the tools are there. And they could do it, and we did it in a very efficient way.
It reminds me of this rule in internet forums. I don't know if you know like this. If you want to know a real and correct answer to a question from a forum of experts. You don't ask a question. You put a wrong answer and look at the comments, because that's when people start to react, and that's where you get the actual truth coming through. No. Yeah, I think we've touched a few things over here that's going to spark some additional, conversations that we have here. And like I said, we're both now doing different things, so I think we're going to have to challenge some of those things on the normal and the basis. But yeah, thanks for that, Jarek. That was a good.
Thank you, Kamil. This was a nice kind of chat about different topics, but I think this theme of centralization versus specialization
we'll come back to it.
And we'll come back to it.
We'll come back to it as well. All right. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks.